What a conversation. Today you have the pleasure of getting to know Gretchen Nemechek. Gretchen is kind of a veteran when it comes to the software industry. She is there or was there for a very long time and also did have a great tenure within SAP, where she also had a great amount of different positions and opportunities to grow. So as you can see, it's not just about having a career path, but furthermore, it's about a career portfolio. In this conversation, we will tackle her journey. So what's the difference between unconscious motivators and intrinsic motivation? Really interesting. Stay tuned and enjoy. Hello and welcome back here at feelingTERrific. Today I have another very special guest with me. Her name is Gretchen. It's also based or thanks to LinkedIn that we both got in contact. So again, LinkedIn is a very powerful platform. And today's title is Business is Personal. Why I chose this kind of title, let's see. Stay tuned because it's going to be personal. Mm-hmm. And maybe a few words about Gretchen because before I'm going to hand it over to her to make kind of her own intro. Gretchen is a founder and the CEO of Opinari. I hope I pronounced it correctly.
You did? Yeah, I got it right.
So first, check, right? So as mentioned today, we will talk about different topics and among them, her motivation to found Opinari and what she learned along the way. So I think, let's get behind those personal points of views. And also motivation and stuff like that. So really curious. I'm really curious because we also were planning this for quite a time. And yes. Today is the day. But thank you for your time, Gretchen. And over to you for the first question. Who are you?
Fire away. I'm ready.
Who are you, Gretchen? Over to you.
Is that an existential question?
Well, it's very interesting because it's really intended to be kind of an open question. Yes. And it's interesting to see how people
answer it. No, that's why I laughed. That's why I thought that could be an existential question. That could be a very practical question. It could be a very data-related question. Let's see. I'll answer that in the best way I can think of, which is probably a little bit of blend of all of those things. So Gretchen Nemechek, I recently founded my company, Opinari, which is focused on helping businesses and leaders be the best versions of themselves. And I take that very seriously. And it's something that's close to my heart. We'll talk a lot more about it. But I recently founded this company. I am a 25-year plus veteran of B2B software and spent my years kind of coming up in all of the areas of go-to-market inside businesses. My first job out of university was in customer support. I spent, at least a couple of years behind the lines, really, taking those late night calls and helping customers solve deep technical problems. And my journey led me through a really interesting path to work with our international business partners, which gave me the chance to travel the world and to meet lots of new people and to experience how different cultures and different environments tax different software systems, predominantly ones that are built in the US. And that's where my fascination and my love of all things global business and interaction came into play. And so I spent some time in product. I spent some time in product marketing and eventually evolved my career into being a lot more focused on marketing and then also sales enablement. These are areas that, from a career perspective, were very interesting to me. And as I, found my way into Germany, which I think we'll get to. I spent some time at SAP and loved my time there. And here I am now.
Yeah, some time. I think it was quite an extensive time.
What's that?
Regarding the move you just mentioned. So, or maybe before going to the move, it sounds like that you have done quite few things, if I'm not mistaken. Mm-hmm. Did you hear about the wording career portfolio?
I have been hearing the term career portfolio over, it's coming up in some of my circles. Yeah, it's an interesting, different way to look at a career. But tell me about what it means to you, and I can talk about it.
I just wanted to say, don't ask me about the definition, but I can tell you definitely what it's for me.
Yeah.
No, but for example, when I hear you talking about what you've done, right? It seems that you were not, for example, whatsoever years just in marketing, kind of, but
exactly.
also different areas of the of a company. And I'm wondering, so for me, for example, I started as a recruiter back in 2016. And for example, during this podcast journey, kind of, I'm much more interested also being involved now in employer branding topics, right? So for me, for example, it could be also something moving into employer branding one day. And this is for me, for example, having a career portfolio. So I'm not maybe just, I mean, it depends on the person, right? But for me, for example, not just being a recruiter, then senior recruiter, then principal or whatsoever, but just having a variety of skill set, I would say, which enriches my personal development or my mind or whatsoever.
Yeah. And I think it all, some people set out to do a job, to pick a career, and this is their chosen profession, if you will. And that's true for a lot of people in, very specific roles, legal careers, medicine, etc. There's a deep investment in a particular profession. So to shift courses and do something different is it's a high cost of change. It's a big difference. For me, I would say I never really set out to have a specific profession. When I got my degree in communication, I was actually intended to go to law school and decided that wasn't for me. I evaluated the life of most of the people I knew who went into the legal profession, and I thought, I don't want to be that person working, 60, 70 hours a week trying to make partner. I'm a very motivated and driven person. And I realized early on, and maybe this was my first smart moment of self-reflection, I realized that with my personality type, that could be a really dysregulated career for me, because I might be so focused on it that everything else falls away. And it also, that type of environment sort of requires it. So I chose consciously after leaving university not to go to law school and also not to go into politics. Those were two paths I was very interested in university. And I ended up meeting this company, this tech company, back in California, right as I was leaving university, who had a software product that was very close to one of the things I did all the way through university, which was I was in hospitality. I waited tables. I worked in restaurants and hotels, and that was the way that I funded my education. And this software company built technology for that industry. And I knew nothing about computers. That was not my field of expertise. I did a little bit of HTML website stuff in college when it was just coming up. I could age myself or date myself pretty easily there. And I found it interesting, but I had no specific skills or expertise. And when I met this company, what I did know was I understood the industry. I understood the buyer and the customer because I'd been in their shoes the whole time. And I also knew that I had what we now call a growth mindset, this openness to learn. I'm sure I don't know how to do that, but I'll learn. And, I found myself in a technical support role, which was really having to troubleshoot very complex technology over the phone, because we didn't have as much of these, Zoom technology that we had, and, figuring out how to re-pin Ethernet cables over the phone when, 6 months before I had no idea what an Ethernet cable was. And so I really just sort of dove in, let's just say rather unintentionally, and maybe that's not the advice that a lot of people want to hear, into what ended up being my first role. But I loved it, and it was exciting, and that role opened me up to other roles. Like I can just tell you how I got into international business. This is probably a funny story because you're German and I'm American, and I now live in Germany. But I was working with some of our customers overseas, and they would frequently call in to this very small American company sitting in Santa Barbara, California, and have difficulties with certain aspects of their software. And nobody who worked beside me could figure out how to call them back. like literally, this was the biggest barrier, is dialing international country codes was the biggest barrier for people to connect with our overseas customers. So I just dove in. I said, okay, well, I'll figure it out. I'm going to get a hold of these people. They need help. It doesn't matter that they're 9 hours ahead or, 7 hours behind if they're in some other country. And I just went for it. And I found a way to be helpful. Right. And it's funny, I just posted on LinkedIn about that today. Just be helpful, add value. And that's what I did. I said, okay, these people need help. Nobody's helping them. I will figure out how to do it. And very quickly, I became the trusted advisor of all of these customers. They said, we don't want to talk to anybody but Gretchen. She's the only one who understands our problems. She's the only one who's willing to help us. And so, I started uncovering their unique requirements and what they needed for software. Our software didn't accommodate European or non-American date formats. So in America, it's, month, day, year. Here and mostly everywhere else, it's day, month, year. And our software and reporting didn't support that. And so, I had to figure out, okay, well, how do we make that work? And so anyway, it's a long way to get to, I just opened myself up to opportunity wherever it was and found a way to solve a problem, found a way to be useful. And that's how I started really being in charge of all of our international customers and partners. And I built that into a business development role. And I found a way to start working with our top tier clients and solving problems. And, then that evolved into a product management role because I was the only one who understood our product completely backwards and forwards and ways that other people reimagined it because they had to solve problems in other countries. And so, this customer support role into a business development role into product management, so that's just part of the journey, but it was all because I was just open to trying new things. And like I said, rather unintentionally, but I would say more serendipitously. And this concept of career portfolio is, I think, just about like being open to experiences that interest you and excite you and tap into something that, is meaningful to you and being helpful. And, that's kind of how it came to be. And there's, more to the story and getting into marketing and things like that. But the foundation is what kind of carried me through my whole career, which was find interesting things to do with interesting people, be helpful, find a way to do it in a place that you enjoy it, and things grow from there.
And the rest comes kind of automatically.
Yeah. It does.
No, I really liked what you just said, and I think this, or maybe not this, but you are quite a good example of having a career portfolio, right? Mm-hmm. And I think maybe also in this regards is that the title is relative, as long as you take it from the right perspective, isn't it?
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah. And I think a lot of people get hung up on titles. In some businesses, titles are a form of currency. And I don't love that. Sometimes you got to play that game. But at the end of the day, it's how you define yourself that matters, right? And what you, what you attach to your own ideas of who you are. And I think that's an important thing is, some roles force people to really solely identify with their position or their role as who they are. I think that's a slippery slope and a really dangerous position to be in because everything is temporary and sometimes those things change and then people will find themselves lost. Coming back to your original question, who are you? I'm Gretchen Nemechek. I'm me. I'm the sum total of my experiences. I'm a mother, I'm a wife, I'm a pet owner. I like the SUP. My identity, I'm also the founder and CEO of this new company, but my identity is all of those things combined and yet none of those things at the same time. I don't know if that makes sense.
It does make sense and it's very physiological. So really great comment. Yeah. And you also mentioned in the beginning that you grew into things. How did you end up in Munich?
How did I end up in Munich? Yeah, so that's a great question. So remember, I was mentioning that I was managing all these international partners at this company I was working for back in Santa Barbara, not long after I left university. Well, I became very close friends with one of the people at one of these business partners. And over the years, we stayed in touch. And, we both since moved on to different roles at different companies, me 2 or 3 times over, I think. And but we stayed really close. And I think that's the power. That's why I think business is personal, is because we create these relationships that have an impact and meaning in our lives. And she told me this company she had just joined was looking for somebody with my skill set. It was Hybris GmbH in Munich. It's an e-commerce company. It was about 450 people at the time in 2012. And they recruited me to come over and build out product marketing for them. And it was an exciting opportunity. My family and I were at a really good crossroads, a unique position to be able to make that leap. It was scary and thrilling and all of those things bundled up into one, but it was the right time for us. And so that's what brought us here. And then Hybris was acquired by SAP a little over a year later after I joined. And so that kicked off a whole sequence of other adventures. But we've been here since 2012 and I love it.
And you're still smiling, I just want to say.
Yeah, most days. I mean, not every day, but that's just being real. Okay, sure. Today I'm smiling.
Perfect. Yeah, and also when it comes to that move, what you also just mentioned, right? I'm wondering. So you just mentioned that you felt it was the right time for your family to move, right?
Yes.
What does it mean?
I think it's no one thing for any. You can't just say, okay, these are the right conditions specifically, but I'll give you some examples. So my husband and I had previously thought about moving overseas for other roles. It was something I'd always wanted to do. I traveled a lot internationally in my previous roles. And I thought this would be exciting. I had this probably fairy tale idea of expat life and what it could be like. And the 2 times we had tried it before, it wasn't the right time. The move would have been, in some cases I would have been really on my own without a big support system, building something that was way outside my comfort zone. In some cases, the funding and the backing from the company was, tenuous at best, and it just didn't feel right. When this opportunity came along, it was like all the stars aligned. Everything moved in exactly the right way. And I try not to be too woo-woo or any of those things, but I really do believe that when things are meant to happen, they will happen, and they will happen in the time they're meant to happen. And we may not always see that, but usually when we can reflect back, we go, oh, okay, yeah, it was supposed to happen that way. And this was one of those situations where just everything lined up, and the way was made clear for us. My husband had a great career in California, and one of the conditions of us moving was that they help us find him a role, because he was leaving behind a career. And he's, there's this idea of trailing spouse, where a spouse just sort of tags along. That's not him. That's not us. He needed to have purpose as well. And they said they would help him find a job. And actually he found a job at Hybris. They helped him find a job there as well, and a role. And he's now with SAP since, many, many years as well. So everything sort of worked out exactly as it was supposed to, So yeah. That's how we knew. It was in our gut, and just in the fact that things didn't feel hard. It's not that things can't feel hard, because I think important things can, but it's whether or not there are multiple obstacles that are just trying to tell you this is not the path you're supposed to be on. And that was not the case in this particular situation, if that makes sense.
It does make sense. And adding to your comment you just made regarding self-reflection. So when you self-reflect, how did this relocation, this whole experience, the whole new chapter in your life shape you as a person?
In so many ways, it's almost difficult to articulate. I mean, we're different on little levels and big levels. I don't know that I would have founded my own company if I hadn't moved here and taken this role. I mean, in my experience as a leader at Hybris and then at SAP, and the team that I built, this special kind of chemistry experiment that I had there, that led me to really tap into this passion that I have around leadership and team building in a way that, I don't know, maybe I wouldn't have at a different type of company in a different type of role had I stayed where I was. So there's that aspect to it. I think the other aspect is, your experiences shape you on a cellular level, even the smallest experiences, and every day of being in a foreign country is a unique experience. You know, in the beginning, certainly things were even more different. I mean, now we mostly understand the language, though I'll never be fluent in German. I think that's perfectly okay.
We can also switch to German if you want.
Yeah, no, we won't. It would be a very quiet podcast and full of grammatical errors. So there's that. I think, you know, our daughter has grown up here. She was 4 when we moved here, and she's 15 now. And, you know, she only spoke English when we moved here, and now she's fully, you know, cross-lingual in both German and English. And so she's a lot of American California girl, but she's, you know, she's lived most of her formative years here in Germany. So that's shaped us in, I don't know, so many ways. Small, silly ways, like we go back to the U.S. and we find it funny that if we try to order Sprudelwasser in a restaurant, they're like, eh? So, you know, little things and big things.
Yeah. You know, I find it very interesting that you mentioned motivation in this context, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Maybe what does mean intrinsic motivation to you? But also, what would you say was the role of intrinsic motivation that you found your company?
It is a great question, and I'm glad that I reread your preparation notes beforehand, because it gave me a few minutes to think about this. In fact, I don't know if I believe in intrinsic motivation, and I'll tell you why. One of the things I've learned over this process in the last few years of really diving into what it means to be a leader, who we are as people, one of the foundational aspects of the coaching and the consulting that I provide is around understanding what each person's unconscious motivators are, because this is what really drives our behavior. So when our unconscious motivators are being met, we have a tendency to show up as the highest and best form of ourselves. When our unconscious motivators are not being met, in a completely automatic and unconscious way, we will probably show up in the lesser version of ourselves, or what Carl Jung calls the shadow version of ourselves. Part of our job, I think, as being people on this planet in our human experience is to get to understand that about ourselves so that we can more skillfully show up as the best version of ourselves as often as possible. That's what I believe, and that's what I've observed. And as I've come to really understand a lot more about this idea of unconscious motivators, this is why I'm not sure that intrinsic motivation really exists. Because what intrinsic motivation suggests is that we do things simply for the joy or the pleasure of doing that thing. And I think you can grow to that, but I really don't think most people do that. I think there is an underlying motivator that is not known to most people, that is part of the process that I help them discover, that is behind all of those decisions. So let me use myself as an example. I'll just be totally open. Our decision to move to Germany. One could think that this, from the outside, looks as maybe an intrinsically motivated event. Like, I think being an expat in another country, that sounds like something super exciting, and I want to do it for the sake of doing that. But really, my motivator was around being successful and wanting to achieve things. This was a great career opportunity for me. This was something that could take me in directions that my previous roles may not have. And so for me, what I know about myself is my 2 unconscious motivators is I am motivated by the desire to be needed and appreciated, which means I like to be helpful to people. I like to support people. I like people to feel that the things that I'm doing are of value. And I want to be successful and achieve things, which means that I'm a go-getter. I'm a person who likes to get stuff done. I'm very driven. I'm very career motivated, etc. So whenever I do something, even if it's just for fun, probably one of those 2 motivators is coming into play. And I think that's true for most people. So I don't know if that answers your question or drives more questions, but I think that there are really these unconscious motivators that people don't see about themselves. That's part of my job, and part of building Opinari is to help people see that, because when we become aware of it, then we can choose differently. So if I'm clear on what I'm motivated by, I can observe when those motivators aren't being satisfied, and I can more skillfully approach situations and know, okay, I'm behaving this way because this motivator is not being met. Somebody's not appreciating me, or somebody's not letting me get my thing done, So anyway, that was a long answer, but it comes down to, that's what I think is really what motivates people.
Yeah, no, I think, I think it adds a really interesting, perspective on it, right? So please correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm trying to summarize it in a few words, right?
Sure.
So intrinsic motivation seems like to be the surface, and unconscious motivators are, they're really deep, the deep drivers.
Exactly.
Right.
You have it exactly correct.
So could it then also be that, for example, when I think my actions are driven based on my intrinsic motivation of XYZ, that I would like that this is the reason, and maybe also pushing the unconscious motivators away?
Yes, exactly. Because maybe those unconscious motivators are uncomfortable. Maybe you don't want to admit that that's really what's driving the behavior, right? So one of the examples I use that comes from this methodology that I use for the unconscious motivators is that, imagine we're all sitting, there are 9 different unconscious motivators. And imagine we have 9 people sitting around a conference table who each have one of these motivators. If there's a bottle of water sitting on the edge of the desk that's about to fall over, each one of those 9 people might reach for it to move the glass. So the behavior, the action is exactly the same. The reason they moved it is different. So each person will have a different why for why they moved it. And in my case, so to be needed and appreciated, or to be successful and achieve things, the first, the to be needed and appreciated, I might move it because I want to move it closer to the person sitting next to me because I think they look thirsty. And if they are thirsty and they take a drink, they're going to appreciate my gesture. They're going to say, oh, that was really nice of you, Gretchen. Thank you for offering me that glass of water, right? So that's one motivator why I might move it. The other motivator why I might move it is that as a person who wants to be successful and achieve things, we're in a meeting. We have a lot of things to get through. The agenda is very clear. If that bottle of water falls on the ground, it's going to derail what we're trying to get done. That's going to slow us down. We're not going to be able to get the things done that we want to get done, right? So these are the 2 things that can play in my mind and in my behavior as to why I would move that bottle. So there's no intrinsic motivation there. It's not like just because for the sake of moving it. There's always a reason, right?
Yeah. So it seems like that I have to rethink my why in my one-pager, or to rethink why I started the podcast.
How about we take that offline, and I can work with you and help you understand what your unconscious motivators are, and then you will understand your why. It's your deep why.
Let's take it offline, of course. Yes. So maybe coming back to SAP, right? So you were there for probably 8 years, and you built your legacy, I would say. Mm-hmm. Why did you start basically at SAP? I mean, you mentioned the company you were starting was acquired, but
yes,
how was the change for you then? And also, how or why were you for a long tenure there?
That's a good question. So yes, the company was acquired, and to be honest, we moved here so I could join that company, Hybris, and the acquisition was exciting. I also was a little bit. It was bittersweet because I wish I could have experienced this, really special culture of that company for a bit longer. So it was a little bit short-lived in how I felt at the time. But at the same time, the experience of becoming a part of a massive organization like SAP was so educational and really offered a lot of different types of opportunities, both in exposure, career growth, tasks, roles, I really spent a lot of time helping out with mergers and acquisitions. So because I had been a part of the post-merger acquisition team with Hybris, when Hybris was acquired on the acquiree side, when we went forward and acquired other companies in our customer experience line, I was an active part in the SAP side of acquiring because I had empathy for what they were going through. I could understand, this is a much bigger company. We're getting you as a smaller company. Here are some of the things you need to know. And what SAP did well is they realized that this acquisition process became easier when you put people who were recently acquired as a part of the post-merger acquisition team, because when you have, a whole post-merger acquisition team that's bigger than the company that you acquired with people who have been 15 years at SAP, it's a bit intimidating and you're like, what, culture shock. So we were able to really serve as a bridge in between the two, still having a bit of our own culture maintained as well. And I stayed because I just had so many different great opportunities to build new teams and to tackle different initiatives and projects. And, and candidly, we were here in Munich and I wasn't sure if I really was interested in trying to find anything else. And nothing seemed, there was no pull in any other direction. And as I kind of told you at the start of the call, a lot of my career has been this unfolding of opportunity. And as long as there was opportunity unfolding, it was interesting. I came to, 2019 and felt I did some periods of self-reflection and felt that I had come to the end of that journey. There were some organizational changes ahead, as is constant at large organizations. And I did this with every big organizational change, and I always encouraged my team to do it as well. Is when you go through these big changes inside a company, any career, you have to sort of sit with yourself and ask, am I ready and willing to re-enlist for whatever this is? So you think about it like the military. Am I willing to re-enlist, recommit myself to this new thing? Because all of these changes represent a new thing. And unless you go into it understanding that it's a new thing, you're always going to be trying to be in the old thing. And that's not healthy. It's not productive. It's not the best thing for the business. It's not the best thing for you. So when you go through these moments of change, you have to decide for yourself, am I in? And if I'm in, I have to be in 100%, or am I out? And there's no halfway. You can't really do it halfway. When people try, that's when people, show up not as the best version of themselves. It's when people are unproductive. It's when things break down inside the organization, and it's not great, and it's no fun to be there. So I always would ask my team as well, we're going through this big change. Are you in 100% or are you out? Either way is fine. There's no judgment, no hard feelings, no, nothing. You just have to know it really in your heart, in or out. And we came to this point of this organizational change, and I'd been there a long time. I wasn't unhappy, but I really realized that I was not in 100%. And I couldn't explain why yet at that point in time, but I wasn't. And so I made the decision to move on. And that's also when I realized, as I was leaving the business, so much had changed. I had done so many things, had so many initiatives, lots of success. But at the end of the day, the only successes that were really, really, really lasting was the impact that I had on people and their lives and their careers and their trajectories. And it wasn't just the people in my team, but people in partner teams who I mentored, or just who got to, sort of as an adopted member of my team, participate. I realized that was the impact that I had. That was the most important thing that I did while I was there. And that's what really got me on this path of finding my own business, to help leaders cultivate that for themselves and for their teams, because that's really what it's all about. We're here to make money. We're trying to drive the business forward and create good outcomes, but we do that by creating these like magical experiences where people are really motivated to bring everything that they can to a situation in a positive and constructive way, not burn out, not any of those things, but really show up with their whole self. Right? So that's that's why I'm here now. That's my purpose.
That's great, and we are coming back to that promise. But two things I would like to highlight on what you just mentioned. The first thing, so at least for me, this is something which is a game changer when it comes to leadership, right? So, for example, what you just told us when there was in the organization a reorganization or change or whatsoever, you really encouraged your team to sit and self-reflect if they are 100% in, or even if they are out. Yeah. And I think this encouragement, this empowerment part, to really that they have the feeling that they are worth. Maybe it's not the right wording, but that they are worth something, right? So that they are not just a number, yes, but they are. Yeah, I think this is inspiring, to be honest.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that they have value, that they bring value, but they also have to be conscious of bringing the value, right? You can't just show up and, phone it in. And that's what a lot of times people spend too much time in one place. It gets really easy to just phone it in and to, bring your B or C game most of the time. And that's not good for them. It's not good for the business. It's not good for anyone. And so you really have to are you willing to do it wholeheartedly? Okay, then let's do it. But if not, that's okay too. Like, I'll help you find something else. There's no judgment. And I had to do that, on a number of occasions. People really, either they could self-reflect enough and admit that they were ready to do something different, or maybe they couldn't self-reflect, but I could see it, that they really weren't all in. And at that point, it becomes how do we find you something that's going to be a little bit more aligned with where your heart's at?
Yeah, and I think that the difference here is also that the people are taking it, or such a situation. So I haven't been there yet so far, so I don't have the experience. But I think, or at least those are my thoughts, that the difference is that they are not taking it personally.
That's right.
They still remind themselves it's a business decision without, as you mentioned, hard feelings. Yes. It is what it is, and moving on, right?
Yeah. And therein lies the paradox, that you mentioned, that they don't have to take it personally, and yet I do believe business is personal. So, it's an interesting point that you raise. The reason why I believe business is personal is not that we should take business decisions personally. It's more that businesses need to embrace the fact that humans are the ones who are, most of the time, there's a lot of AI at the moment, but where humans are involved, humanity is involved, and each person, brings something unique and special and difficult, complicated, messy. Everybody brings that to what they do every day. And we have to be conscious of that. We have to support that. We have to, sometimes tough love that. We have, but all of it is that these are people. And also, so many of my life experiences are directly tied to jobs that I have had, or roles that I have played, or people I've met or encountered through these really interesting career experiences in my portfolio of career that I have had. And I wouldn't have had those if I didn't have those experiences. And so it's hard. I think it's disingenuous to say it's just a business decision and these are just jobs, because we engage with people every day, whether it's customers or coworkers or partners. These are all people, and we're people, and those are interesting and important relationships that we build. So that's why I think it's personal.
Yeah, and this, I think, adds really great on the second point. I didn't forget it. The second point, what you made, right? Where you told us the example of that you have been on the acquisition team, right? Mm-hmm. So that you were building the bridge between SAP at this time and also the new or the acquired company.
Yes.
And what I think is that empathy, what you also mentioned, is, this is what makes it, yes, for the acquired company and the people, basically, easier to deal with this situation, but also to be felt like that they are seen as humans, right? That they are not just a company which is acquired and just a headcount is moving from A to B, but it's basically about the person.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And it also, it bridges the other way as well, right? Because the acquired company can dehumanize the people on the other side as being a part of this machine. And in fact, we use that term a lot in these big organizations, the machine, right? It's literally a dehumanization of the collection of individuals who make up that machine. Mm-hmm. And so, when you're in the acquire, and I was guilty of this too. So like, I'm not saying it from a pedestal of I was perfect. I didn't do any of that. I did. And that's also what made it probably easier for me to bridge the gap, because I could say, look, I've been where you have, I've felt the things that you felt. I've looked at this post-merger acquisition team of 45 people and thought, oh my gosh, this is overwhelming. You people have no connection to what we do, right? And because I had been in that position, I could help them dehumanize the other folks less as well, to say, hey, look, these are also people, a lot of the post-merger acquisition, you may say, okay, they've been with SAP for 14 years, but they were actually with Business Objects beforehand. They were also acquired. It was a long time ago, but they were also acquired. And, so helping them see the humanity on the other side, from the acquiree direction as well, was really important. And yeah, it is about empathy. I think we have to connect those experiences to make the world run better.
Yeah, and coming back to Opinari, right? So you have been plus minus 7 months now within the entrepreneurship journey adventure. Yes. How do you feel? What kind of summary?
I feel really good now, but I will tell you honestly, somebody shared with me not too long ago this rule of thirds, in that there's an Olympian who had a coach, and her coach said, look, you're going to feel good a third of the time, you're going to feel okay a third of the time, you're going to feel absolutely crappy a third of the time. And this is the case when you're working toward an important goal. As long as those three things are more or less in balance, you're doing okay. But, if it gets out of whack in any one direction, like if you are feeling good all the time, then the chances are you're not working hard enough, and you're not growing, and you're not learning, and all of these things. On the flip side, if you're feeling crappy all of the time, chances are something's not working right. You have to look at, it's kind of like I said, when we moved over here, if there were obstacles like all along the way, if every day that we thought about moving was a bad one, then it was probably not the right decision. So it's the same way with entrepreneurship. I would say it's a third, a third, a third. Some days I'm on top of the moon. It's the best thing ever. I love it. Some days are hard, bureaucracy of, finding a company in Germany is not easy, taxes and, all of these things. It's just a part of the business. So yeah, and some days they're just fine, and that's absolutely okay. So yeah, I try to keep that in mind from now on, is when I have, when I'm having a harder day for whatever reason, things just don't feel like they're working, I have to slap myself across the face a little bit and say, okay, well, this is one of those a third down days, and there will be a day tomorrow that's probably okay, and the next one will probably be fantastic. So that's okay.
No, that's great to hear. And I think also, accept the situation or the journey, how it is. I think that's also something which is kind of critical to last in the long run, right?
Yes.
But absolutely. So I didn't. So I wasn't aware of this one third theory. Mm-hmm. My question would have been, how would you describe the mental health roller coaster kind of?
Yeah, I wouldn't call it necessarily a roller coaster. I don't know. So I guess maybe there are some points, but when you look, at a graph that's like this, if you even it out, it's more or less a decent straight line, as opposed to these. I don't know if I feel it's a roller coaster. I don't know if it's mental health roller coaster, but it certainly has its ups and downs, more maybe like undulating bumps. And I think you just have to remember why you're in it. For any entrepreneur, I think whether they're building some kind of, cutting edge tech, or they're doing something like I am, which is with, consulting and coaching to help people be the best versions of themselves. You have to remember why you're doing it. So on the days that are harder, it's about realizing that the whole reason I got into this business was to help people and to help make the world a better place, one person at a time, and one business at a time. And as long as I'm doing that, that's aligned with the reason I set out on this adventure, then it's all fine. And so it's remembering that some of those mundane tasks are all also in the service of this higher goal. And if it's not, then I shouldn't be doing it. So.
Yeah, true. But how did you feel when you signed the paper with the notar? I don't know if that's the correct word, but how did you feel when the company
in that moment
founded?
It was exciting. It was I would say it was exciting. It was like, wow, okay, I did this. But then I would tell you, it's one of those things where it's kind of like before the call, we had a little just quick conversation about your wedding. I was saying you take a moment to just appreciate the grandeur. So I did. When I signed the paperwork, it was like, wow, this is a moment. This is a milestone. It's super exciting and interesting. This is the thing that I've founded. And however, it's one tiny moment in the whole grand scheme of things of the life of this organization. And so, post that moment, there were many, many, many other moments, some of them harder, some of them easier, that sort of accumulate to make the business what it is. And that one moment was certainly necessary, and it was important. But I would say there have been just as many important events all along the way since that point in the journey. It was really like almost, if you're on a road trip, for example, and you're going multiple locations, that was the first stop on the journey. That was like, okay, this vacation's getting started. Yes, but there's still a lot of road trip ahead.
Yeah, and you're talking about up and downs, right? Kind of. But I'm wondering, did you have a moment where you really had self-doubt? And how did you overcome them?
Yeah, I mean, I think everybody does. So I would be lying if I said I didn't. And I think it comes where you question a little bit, okay, is this the right thing at this moment in time? Do I have all of the skills needed to do it? That's just totally natural to have these questions and these moments where you ask that. I would say what I do to overcome it, I lean on my family a lot. They're a huge support system for me. They see my blind spots. They see my shadow. They can tell me when I'm being ridiculous, which, sometimes we are. Like, our brain does funny things. I like to say, don't believe everything you think. And sometimes it's easy when you're in that moment to believe everything you think. And, so it's great to have people around you who will, like I said, slap you upside the head a little bit, not physically, metaphorically, to tell you, you're being silly. And so I think, my family is certainly a huge source of support and inspiration and reality checking for me. Walking in nature, like just getting outside. Sometimes, you sit in one spot, you can start to let your mind, run away and tell you stories that are not true. And I find that when I go for a walk in nature, it's just changes everything almost instantly. It's like getting a shot of medicine, right away. And funny story is that I live very near Forest Cemetery here in Munich, Waldfriedhof, and that's one of my favorite places to go walking. And some people think it's so funny. They're like, you go walking in a cemetery, and if you've never been there, you should. It's beautiful. The thing is, it's an absolutely gorgeous cemetery that's in a forest, and it's not like most cemeteries. But the reason it's so unique is that I find myself walking among people who are no longer living, and it puts life in perspective, right? Each one of these people had a life on this planet for however long or short it was. And I'm here only for a finite period of time as well. So do I want to waste my time worrying about these, things that my mind is telling me that causes me to doubt it? Or do I want to carry on and get busy with the thing that I know that I can make an impact on? And it's kind of that reality check, like, okay, well, I'm still here. I'm above ground. I'm not below the ground. That is a good thing. So keep moving. Stop whining.
No, I can relate to what you say. For me, it's kind of the same. I think it grounds someone, being on a summary. It's a good thing. So I haven't been there yet, but I will.
And by the way, Michaela Ende, who wrote The Never-Ending Story, which is a great book that has a lot of beautiful nuggets about, purpose and journeys, he's buried there. So you can go see his grave in Valtteri.
We'll take it with me.
Yes.
But tell us a little bit about the Opinari method.
Absolutely. Yes. So the Opinari method is really three things that come together. The first I mentioned is unconscious motivators. I work with a company called Paul Hertz Group, and they have a proven the last 30 years methodology for helping to uncover the unconscious motivators. So this is a tool that I use. We get the profile for each of the individuals that I work with, and it helps people become aware of these motivators, become aware of who they are when they're at their best, who they are when they're not, what are the things that trigger them, so that we can start to form a strategy for showing up as your best self every day as much as possible, knowing that there are going to be days, there are going to be moments, there are going to be events that drive us to not be our best self, but we have a choice. Once we're conscious of this, we have a choice to make, and we can choose differently. So that's one of the pillars of the Opinari method. The second is that I work with the field of somatics, which is really getting into the body as well, and understanding that our bodies are the sum total of our lived experiences as well. Every cell, every tissue, every experience that we had in our body, right? And so a lot of the times, most of us are fairly disconnected from that. We might, we run or we exercise, and so we feel like we're connected to our body, but we don't always connect our behaviors to how we carry ourselves or the felt experiences that we have in our bodies. And so one of the aspects of the Opinari method is that we connect physical experiences, embodied experiences, how we carry ourselves, physical reactions or responses to situations, and we connect that to these unconscious motivators. We connect it to the behaviors. And I'll give you an example. So let's say I'm at work and I get an email from my boss, and my boss has a tendency to micromanage me. And I know through my unconscious motivators that micromanaging is one of the things that tends to trigger me, that I feel uncomfortable or I really don't like it when people micromanage me. What we start to do in the somatic side is help the people tap into what they're feeling physically in that moment when they get that email, because our physical response to situations can be an early warning system for what behavior might come after. So if we accept that when we're triggered or when an unconscious motivator is not being met, that we might show up in the least good version of ourselves, those are specific sets of behaviors. If we can connect the physical reaction to those two things, then we can get ahead of the behavioral response. So in that situation, I get an email from my boss who likes to micromanage, or she likes to micromanage me, and it says, need an update on blah, blah, blah. And I know that this is something that bothers me. I can start to feel like, okay, what do I feel in my body? Do I feel my heart racing? Do I feel my breath getting shallow? Do I feel my face getting flushed? Do I feel hot or cold? Or, what are the physical sensations that come when I get that email? Like I remember some situations. I would get an email from my boss, certain subject line. I'd feel my heart rate raise. I'd start feeling weak in my extremities, and it wasn't even super stressful but I was having literally a fight or flight response to that event. And so once I started to become aware of the physical response, which lasts about 15 to 90 seconds, it's a completely physiological response. You have no control over it, but it's going to burn itself out after about 90 seconds. And then after that, our mind takes over. And then we start adding story. We start adding assumptions. We start adding our interpretations of that event. And then my behavior might show up as, well, he's always doesn't trust me, or, all of these things, right? So I went through that physical experience, but I went through it so fast and I wasn't aware of it that I just went straight into the reaction. And so the idea of the somatics is, if people can get connected to physical response, that becomes a signpost. Hey, trigger alert, physical response happening, behavior might be coming. You can choose differently. You can say, okay, you know what? I feel this happening. I'm going to take 3 conscious breaths. I'm going to go for a walk. I'm going to do whatever these things are that can help me short circuit that behavior, which is unproductive, which is exaggerated, which is disproportionate, what have you. And then I can choose to respond differently. But if we just let ourselves get carried away on that sort of tidal wave of activity, we're going to respond, and, we're going to be mad, we're going to hit send, and then we're going to regret it, or, all those things that happen. So the whole idea behind the somatics is get the body connected. And so that's the second thing. It was a long way to explain it. That was the second thing. The third thing is, okay, great. So now that we know that, we know our behaviors, we know our physical responses, what do we do about it? And so the third element is really bringing in a lot of research in the latest in neuroscience and how behavioral change happens, in order to be able to put in place tools, skills, necessary things that can help us be better at showing up. So a silly example, I read not too long ago that petting a dog, so just like, if you have a dog or somebody else has a dog and you pet this dog for 15 to 30 seconds, this kicks off your parasympathetic nervous system, which means you're triggering positive hormonal response in your body. Those are things that help you feel good. So if you're feeling stressed, pet a dog for 15 to 30 seconds, maybe even more. But you literally physiologically and neurologically hacked your system to drive positive hormones into your body. So it's like understanding, okay, what are these little things that we can do based on all of the new things we're learning about the brain and neuroscience and the connection between our emotions to help people change in a more sustainable way. So that's the Opinari method, is the unconscious motivators, somatics with the physicality, and then the neuroscience of how we change.
Yeah, no, this is really insightful. And correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems that also having the ability to be self-aware is also kind of a key here, isn't it?
Absolutely. That's the first step in understanding the unconscious motivators, is that most people don't know these things about themselves. I mean, why would you? We don't learn this when we're growing up, unless you have, parents who are psychologists or, in fields that are related to this. We don't know this about ourselves. We just, our unconscious motivators are actually set when we're about 5 or 6. And it's basically, beyond your needs, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, your needs for food, shelter, connection, belonging. What do you need to function? What do you need to feel fulfilled? What do you need to show up and to do things that you need to do? And that's what these unconscious motivators are. And so if you think back to your childhood, once you know what these unconscious motivators, you can think, okay, that's how I got approval. That's how I got, the good job from my parent or, my teacher was doing these types of things or being perceived these ways. And that's where that self-awareness starts, is when you can start to recognize that these were the drivers behind a lot of your behaviors through your life. It gives you a much better vantage point for understanding why you behave the way that you do.
Yeah. And how does the Opinari method supports leaders?
So I think leadership roles are one of the most, it's like being a parent. It's one of the most important jobs you can do, because you are responsible for the lives of other people. whether you like it or not. That is really the fundamental role of a leader. There are people who look to you for support, guidance, care, career growth, job security, all of these things. They are your responsibility. And in order to be a good leader, you have to be able to manage these things yourself, or else you transfer all your own dysfunction onto other people. It's just like parenting. If you're not a self-aware parent, you're living in an unconscious way, you're transferring all of your unconscious baggage over to your kids. And that's, unfortunately, that's life. That's what happens. But as leaders, if we can become more skillful, if we can become more aware of what drives us and how we show up, we can choose, and we can show up as the best versions of ourselves. Why is that important to the people that work for us? Well, we're going to be more empathetic. We're going to be kinder. We're going to be compassionate. We're going to have their interests at heart. We're going to help them. All of these things that encompass being our best selves. But also the Opinari method is helpful for leaders because I work with teams as well. And so what leaders can understand when I also work with their teams is they can know what are the unconscious motivators of every person on their team. So as a leader, this is a superpower. If I can understand that Paula is, and these are made up names, I'd never had anybody reporting to me named Paula. If Paula is motivated by wanting to be seen as knowledgeable and smart, and Fred is motivated by wanting things to be peaceful and harmonious, I have to lead them differently. I have to communicate with them differently. I have to maybe have them in different roles than they're in if that particular role doesn't work for them. So it gives you that insight into how they're motivated, but also why they behave the way that they do. So if you have somebody in your team who frequently disengages, like they just, they get stressed and they just pull away. Well, understanding why that is helpful. Maybe they're pulling away because they don't feel secure. There's too much change going on. One of their motivators is to have safety and security. When they don't feel that that's there, they just retreat like a turtle into its shell. Well, if you understand that about them, you can be more conscious at helping them understand, what is safe and secure, what is known, and also to give voice to their concerns about things that are uncertain, because a lot is uncertain. And so how do you help them become more skillful and adaptable to uncertain environments? Because that's something you can help them grow with, right? So as a leader, I can understand this about myself, but then when I understand this about all of the people in my team, I can lead them better as individuals, because every person in front of us is a unique individual. And we have to treat them as such. We can't just treat them all the same.
Yeah, no, definitely. I agree with you totally. And I'm wondering, when, for example, when there is an interview for leadership role, and then there's usually kind of the question coming up from the recruiter or from the manager, what is your leadership style? Is that kind of leading in the wrong direction then?
Say that one more time.
Yeah. So for example, we have an interview situation, right? And the manager asks the candidate, what is your leadership style? Yeah. Based on what you just said, it seems that this question is leading in a wrong direction.
I don't know if it's leading in a wrong direction. There may be better questions to ask. I mean, in a perfect world, honestly, in a perfect world, every company would have somebody do their print before they interviewed them so they could ask the right questions. That is a perfect world. It's hard to get there. But, I think understanding the leadership style, people can answer the question in a very crafted way, and sometimes in an inauthentic way. Hopefully, most people answer it truthfully. But I think a better question, or a different question that's maybe more insightful, is who are you when you're stressed? Like who do you become under the greatest of pressure? What happens? And see if you can have people give you examples of that. I'll tell you a funny story. I was interviewing a gentleman for a leadership position on my team years and years ago. And he was traveling from overseas to come for this interview. And he ended up being late for the interview. And I'm fine. I'm not like, you have to be on time or, everything's out the window. That's not the issue. But when he got there, he was late and he was very apologetic. But after apologizing for his tardiness, what followed that was a unfiltered, somewhat unconscious explanation of why he was late, because he was stressed. So I was able to see who he was when he was stressed, and who he became when he was stressed was he was blaming the taxi driver. He was demeaning to the taxi driver. He said, this stupid taxi driver didn't know where to take me, all these things, and he was not composed. He was not his higher self, because he felt really stressed for having been to this important job interview late. I couldn't have architected a better test of who he was when he was stressed, right? Because he showed me exactly in this moment who he was and when he was stressed. Now, does that mean that he's always that way when he's stressed? No. But at least some of the time, when the pressure's on and the stakes are high, that's what happened. And, and then the rest of the interview was great and a lot of things were fine. But for me, this was a real red flag, because I frequently observe people in stressful situations, and everybody has a hard time showing up as the best version of themselves. But what I don't tolerate as a leader is blaming and demeaning and lack of respect to other people and throwing people under the bus. And I thought to myself, how quickly might you do that with your peers if you were made to look bad for some reason? And so I think looking into who we become when we're stressed is one aspect. And then you can flip it around just to not all be negative, but who are you when you're at your best? Like when you're absolutely in the flow of things and when everything is going super well, what does that look like for you? And why do you think you are that way? That might be how I would take it.
Yeah. No, definitely. And I'm also with you that it's about the questions and the preparation up front.
Yeah.
For example, I've made an experience once when I was also in a job interview. Mm-hmm. And I had the feeling that it was basically, the questions I did receive were not tailored to my experience.
Right.
And then I did get a rejection based on, you are too junior or whatsoever, right? But
right.
Basically, they didn't qualify me basically as a person, but also with my experience.
Right.
So it's about the questions.
For reading from a script. And I think, that's one thing I learned very early on in my career from my very first leader that I had and from the very first time she interviewed me, was that it was about having a conversation, right? Yes, there are some things that I need to know and there's some specifics, but it's about getting to know the person, to understand and to view the person in front of you as unique, and to view that particular conversation as unique, and to just let the conversation unfold in a way that allows you to see who that person is. And if they're a fit for the role, if they're a fit for the organization, if they're a fit for the team, that's what's important in my mind, and that's how I approached interviews always, was let's just have a conversation. And I would find out the most amazing things in these conversations. Found out one time this young lady who was very keen to understand the vacation policy. And I was like, okay, well, this is the policy. And, oh, that's a few days less than what I have at my current job. Okay, well, okay. Is that possible to change that? Not for one person. No, unfortunately, that is, that's the policy. And okay. I said, well, it sounds like that extra 3 days is very, very important to you. And I would say if that is your most important criteria, then you should stay where you're at, because it sounds like you got a pretty good deal, So stay there. I mean, that's the thing you want. Then you've got a good situation, And so it was interesting. And then from my perspective, what it told me about this candidate is that there was not a lot of flexibility there. Like there was this opposite of growth mindset, fixed mindset, where it had to be just this way. And that was their view of the world. And that's fine, but that's not what I needed in my team. I needed people who had growth mindset, So it's just some of these little, having these little natural conversations, you learn things about people that I think can tell you what you need to know.
Yeah, no, this was a great example. Thank you for sharing. Maybe last question regarding leadership in this context. What do you think about the role of emotional intelligence?
I think it's absolutely critical. It's, it links all of the things that matter in leadership, which is, am I aware of my own emotions? Am I aware of my own behaviors that result from those feelings? Do I have the skills necessary to do something productive with it? Because a lot of times when we're not our best self, it's a dysregulated or a distorted experience of an emotion, and we respond inappropriately. And so having that understanding, having that self-awareness is absolutely critical to be a good leader. But I also think it's critical to be a good employee. I think it's critical to be a good human being, period. Like just show up that way, right? But I think also as a leader, it's having that capacity to understand other people's experiences also. We don't have to have lived that experience. Like, so in the case of this post-merger acquisition, was it better that I had been through it? Yes, absolutely. Because it made it easy. The empathy part was easy because I had been through it. But really skilled, emotionally intelligent people can have that level of empathy absent a shared experience, right? And that's where it really becomes important, because let's say you have an employee on your team who's underperforming, and you find out that they're underperforming because they have a parent who has cancer and is dying. Okay, this happens all the time. It's life. It is absolutely life. Do I have to have had a parent who has had cancer and is dying in order to be able to have empathy with them? No, I don't. But a high degree of emotional intelligence will allow me to understand that this is a difficult period of time that they're going through, to have compassion, to communicate in a way that is helpful to them, to check my own behavior and emotion a little bit more when I'm engaging. So it's that level of skillfulness, I would say, in terms of how we interact with other people. So it's critical for leaders, but I think it's critical for everybody.
We leave it here. Maybe last question. We are also almost at the end of our conversation. Mm-hmm. Self-awareness, self-reflection, mental health, recharging, purpose. Buzzword bingo or what?
No, I really don't think they're buzzword bingo. I mean, you can reduce almost any kind of words like this down to lingo or, buzzword bingo if you want. At the end of the day, though, each one of them is so important. So like I said, self-awareness, in order to show up the right way in the world, to be of the highest service, to help people, to, create a better world around us, we have to be self-aware. And the same goes with mental health. The example I mentioned of somebody who has a parent who's dying of cancer, this affects how we show up in the world, and we have to care for other people. We have to understand that those are very real experiences that people are having, and looking, and that's why, coming back to humans being, what run businesses, every person has experiences that we don't see, and we have to be able to, meet those with empathy, with compassion, and to create an environment where people can take care of themselves. Because at the end of the day, when we show up in the world with our tanks depleted, with our mental health out of order, with not being the best version of ourselves, the most problematic outcome is that we impact other people in a negative way, right? So we continue that chain reaction. If I show up in a poor way, if I'm mean or rude, chances are that's going to set somebody else into a bad state of being for themselves, and they're going to go off and carry that into their interactions, and it creates this vicious cycle. Whereas showing up in the world in a great way creates a virtuous one. And So I think we have to care for people's mental health, because they're not going to show up as the best version of themselves if we're not looking after that. It's just important. We're all human beings after all. So
let's close it here. Nothing better to say at the end. So thank you for sharing your thoughts and also for your time. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely.
And hope to see you soon.
It's been my pleasure. And I'm really glad we were finally able to do it.
That's right. And let's try to find a good cup of coffee in Munich one day. And hope to see you soon. Thank you for your time, Gretchen.
Thank you very much. Take care.